Catholics have outnumbered Protestants in Northern Ireland for the first time. The latest census results have revealed. 46% of the population are now Catholic, 43% are Protestant or another Christian religion. There's also some quite interesting moves, some quite profound shifts in how people think of themselves in terms of national identity, whether they think of themselves as British or Irish or a combination of both. Indeed, there is even an option to go for the hat trick, British, Irish and Northern Irish. All three of those things. There's a really surprisingly low figure for people in Northern Ireland who consider themselves simultaneously British, Irish and Northern Irish. I don't know that we need a massive introduction on this one. I've got quite a lot to say, but it possibly isn't as interesting as what you, as someone with roots in Northern Ireland or listening currently in Northern Ireland, has to say. Let's find out. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. It's 6 minutes after 10, and there are now more Catholics in Northern Ireland than Protestants. What does that mean? What does that mean for the present and perhaps more pertinently for the future? Hit these numbers now. You will get through. So here's a funny thing. It depends, I think, in part on how old you are, but everybody British has some sort of relationship with Northern Ireland, whether you have Irish heritage, as I obviously do, or not. Not least because of the Troubles, not least because of the fact that the IRA's atrocities on these islands, in Great Britain, defined a generation almost. You know, I grew up, as you probably know by now, in a journalist's household. My dad was a journalist. He was a Midlands correspondent at the Daily Telegraph. The Birmingham Six was a story that obviously, given the later acquittals, ran through his career like the River Thames runs through London. There was even, and I wrote a little about this in my first book, when I was young, you would even, as someone with an Irish surname, get treated similarly to how Muslims were treated when Islamist atrocities, Islamist terrorism began to kick off. You'd have that idea that because you were Irish, you were somehow complicit, or because you are Irish, you must be a terrorist, which is, you know, as a kid, absolutely nonsensical. It makes no sense at all. But I remember, sort of 11, 12 years old, I could still tell you the name of the kid that did it, actually, but I don't think that would be fair, being called a terrorist. At my prep school, at my very sort of middle class, upper middle class, exclusive prep school, a very strange experience. And I'm not mentioning any of this for particularly profound reasons. I'm just talking about how we all have relationships with Northern Ireland, whether you realise it or not. For much younger people, it's going to be the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement is actually why you don't have as complicated or serious a relationship with Northern Ireland as both a concept and a territory as older people do. You haven't lived under the shadow of sectarian violence in Northern Ireland itself, or indeed terrorist activity in Great Britain. It is also probably worth mentioning, while I'm giving my chapter and verse on this one, that my first ever political speech at the age of 10, I was quite frighteningly precocious. At the age of 10, in a mock election for what must have been the 1982. There was a general election in 82. Was it 82 or 83? It's possible I just looked at the wrong colleague then. I stood as an SDLP candidate, which was a very little-known party in Great Britain at the time. Well, certainly among most 10 and 11-year-olds. I mean, part of the reason was because the big boys got to choose the big parties in the mock election that we had at my school. The big boys would be the Conservatives and the Labour and the Liberal Democrats. But I was, as I say, horribly precocious and political. Really wanted to get involved in it. And so the SDLP, which of course produced some of the finest politicians Northern Ireland has ever seen, many of whom proved to be absolutely exceptional architects of the ultimate Good Friday Agreement. But the idea as a young person of Ireland not being united was quite influential for me. It was quite formative. The sense of an unfairness to it, and the knowledge that it was a largely religious divide, and I felt the statistical inevitability of there being more Catholics one day there than Protestants. I guess at some point in the last few years that has ceased to be a statistical inevitability, hasn't it? Because I don't know if you remember the Monty Python song "Every Sperm is Sacred," but the moratorium upon contraception in Ireland among the Catholics meant that the birth rate among Catholics in Northern Ireland would be higher than among Protestants. The religious instruction not to use contraception, which many Catholics obeyed, meant that the population growth on one side of the religious divide was always likely to overtake population on the other side of the religious divide. But when you think that sort of attitude to contraception has been in pretty swift retreat in Northern Ireland for a very long time, the inevitability of it perhaps becomes slightly diluted. I don't know. I mean, there you go. There it is. There's some of my early ponderings on this remarkable statistic. There are now more Catholics in Northern Ireland than there are Protestants, or depending on how you like the language to be conveyed, Catholics have outnumbered Protestants in Northern Ireland for the first time. So call me now and tell me what this means. What does it mean in the context of a united Ireland, most obviously? Does this, like Brexit, accelerate the likelihood of a united Ireland? The Northern Ireland Protocol, which of course was negotiated by David Frost and celebrated and trumpeted by Boris Johnson, still has senior Conservatives in both politics and media desperately trying to disown it or find somebody else they can blame it on rather than their own heroes. It is a growing, or certainly not a likely to disappear anytime soon problem, but it's not insuperable. There have been some fairly positive noises actually coming from both camps. The problem is there's a suspicion Liz Truss doesn't want resolution. She quite likes the idea of a continuing fight with Brussels over this, with the European Union over this. But the idea when I was 10 or 11 years old that we would sit here in 2022 and actually talk about Northern Ireland as a place where Catholics are in the majority, and don't forget that we're supposed to have a First Minister from Sinn Féin in the Stormont at the moment, if they ever actually get back to work, then we're looking at something absolutely huge, something portentous, and something that may have a profound and permanent impact upon the very future of the United Kingdom. In fact, and this is why I need calls, because, I made a New Year's resolution at the beginning, I think, of last year that we were going to pay a heck of a lot more attention to events in Northern Ireland, in Scotland and in Wales, but I am still far from expert. I'm a lot more confident on more English-based issues than I am on Northern Irish ones, but I would imagine, and I am absolutely prepared to retreat at 100 miles an hour from what I'm about to say, this surely is the beginning of the end of the United Kingdom, isn't it? 03456060973 is the number you need. I mean, how can it not be? Given that essentially, after partition, Northern Ireland was the sort of Protestant enclave where Catholics for generations were treated as third, fourth, fifth class citizens and remained in a minority, while Southern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, was the Catholic sovereign nation, if you like. You now have a majority of Catholics in Northern Ireland, and indeed a majority, or at least an electoral victory for the Republican political party. This simple statistical fact seems to me as very much a plastic paddy looking across the sea to a place I don't understand, but I do feel deeply about. This, to me, feels like the beginning of the end of the United Kingdom, which is, I hope, sufficient reason to explain to you, if you're feeling a bit baffled by my choice of story at 10 o'clock this morning, why I think this is of huge importance. And that is the question I've got for you. What does this mean to you, or indeed to the country? And pick whichever country you please. Ireland, Northern Ireland, United Kingdom, Great Britain, England, I don't know. What does it mean? 03456060973. And is this... In fact, I'm going to leave it as a question, but it's pretty close to a statement. I would say this was 52% question, 48% statement. This is surely the beginning of the end of the United Kingdom, or even the middle of the beginning of the end of or possibly even the end of the United Kingdom.